And today on What the Funk, we have Shrivan Kamdar, one of my favorite colleagues from back in the day at Seven Lakes. I think you came aboard in 2014 at,
That sounds right, yeah.
and you were one of the first people there that didn't have a really strong accent. if I'm right about that. But I remember you bringing some immediate value to the table. You had experience in the oil and gas industry. Um, Kind of threw you onto a bunch of projects right away. You and I hit it off. We've stayed in touch even after my time there. You stayed through the Seven Lakes acquisition by W Energy Software, and you're still there, still working at W these days. So one of the few left. There's only like three or four of you guys, right, that have
Yeah,
lasted
yeah,
this
not
long
too
through the
many.
acquisition. Yeah,
Yep.
which is crazy. So it's really fun to have you on today. I think you've got a real level-headed, forward-thinking, tech-forward approach to oil and gas as a whole. You've worked at small companies, you've worked at big companies, you've worked on the product side, you've worked a little bit on the sales side. So we'll get into all of that, but I really want to get into your background too. I know you're a Southern California kid, but the question that I'll ask you right now is, who are you, man? Who is Shrivan Kamdar?
Yeah, I'd say, first and foremost, I'd say I'm a father, husband, and a son, obviously. Outside of that, like to travel. I play some Eastern Indian classical music whenever I get a chance.
Oh,
Um, Part-time YouTuber, not famous at all, just make some fun videos with my son here and there. Um, and Think on the professional side, someone who loves how to look at a problem, debottleneck it, and then, if I'm not the one solving it, figuring out who's solving good ones and investing in them, as a stock picker.
all
On the
right.
spiritual side, I go to India a couple times a year. I do some volunteer work, and then I just hang out in an ashram for a couple weeks and do
That's
some
cool.
spiritual reading or retreats a couple times a year. So that's part of who I am. And outside of that, yeah, I think on the, I like to think of myself as one of the pioneers in terms of flipping the tech side of the oil and gas field on its head, in terms of being one of the first to design software that was focused on the field first versus on
Mhm.
the back office first, because I always had an appreciation of the money's made where the valves are turned, and that's where the dollars make sense, so to speak.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah.
So the spiritual stuff, that's a little bit unique. So I mean, spiritual stuff in general is not unique, but you go to India for it. So talk to me a little bit about that. What is a spiritual retreat like in India?
Yeah. Yeah, so obviously we have our religious texts and things like that that may be hundreds or thousands of years old, but a lot of times it's hard to relate to, well, how am I supposed to live by this specific book? So we've got consultants, doctors, engineers, a group of us that go to an ashram, and they just have kind of these almost like a spiritual conference but retreat. You live, you're disconnected from everything, and there's sessions that you can attend about, okay, how do you take these ancient principles and apply them in your modern life
Mm.
to generally find the peace that you're always running after. But if you're running after it, you're never going to be peaceful. So how do you stop running, still achieve what you can in the same amount or less time, and just find that inner peace that's in there somewhere, because you feel it every now and then.
That's fascinating stuff. And yeah, it's you've got the past, you've got the future, but what about the present, right? You got to
Yeah.
enjoy that. So
Yep.
yeah, I think that's unique. I don't think anybody that's ever come on this podcast before, 150-ish episodes, has done spiritual retreats in India. So that certainly makes you unique.
Yeah,
Less
doesn't
unique,
have
I
to
would
be in
say.
India, I'd recommend it anywhere, but
Yeah,
just the group I could find went to India.
yeah, I love spiritual retreats and feel like I'm overdue for one. That's a whole nother long conversation. Maybe we'll touch on that a little bit later. But one of the things that I would say is a little less unique is your background. You took like somewhat of a traditional path, I think, to oil and gas. You I know you were a UCLA, USC guy. I'm sure that provides you lots of internal conflict. Who do I root for in the big game? Who do you root for?
Whoever's closer to winning the championship that year. So basketball is going to be UCLA, football is going to usually be USC. But I
Just a
like to
big
diversify.
just a big LA fan in general.
Yep.
But career-wise, right? So you get out of your MBA at USC and you worked for ExxonMobil, right, on the downstream side of things. And I remember having this conversation with you in Thousand Oaks. This must have been late 2014 at one point, and asking like, "Wow, so here you are at ExxonMobil, and now you're coming over here to Seven Lakes at this like 30-person company that's trying to be disruptive. Like, what made you do that?" And I remember your answer, but I want to kind of hear it from you and have you tell the audience, like, what made you want to make that move from, seeing your pension, seeing the long-term possibilities of a company that's one of the biggest and most powerful in the world, that's always going to be around, in ExxonMobil,
Right.
to something riskier in a California-based oil and gas tech startup. Why'd you make that move?
Yeah, I think being at Exxon for 8, 9 years, you were getting to the point where the golden handcuffs were not that far away, right? And I just had to ask myself that, hey, I'm getting a lot of great experience. And after 8 years, I'd also just finished my MBA, and I felt a lot smarter because I'd learned so many cool new things in the MBA. And I'd gotten the practical experience of chemical engineering while at ExxonMobil.
Hmm?
But the pace of what you could try and do was very slow, right? You had a set
Yeah.
decision, but to execute on that decision would take forever. So I really had to think, okay, there's this butterfly of a startup that I can go join, or I can spend the next 30 years here. And I thought it was time to take at least one risk in life, and I think at the time I was taking more than one because just finished the MBA, had a new baby, and then let's shift careers completely. So it was not the, probably looking back, not the safest time, but I did it anyway, and I'm glad I did because that led to a lot of new opportunities. I literally probably I checked off, I think in the first year at Seven Lakes, I went through my list of MBA classes, and I probably like applied all of them within one
Yeah.
year in a startup. So that was pretty cool. I thought I'd never be able to do that.
Yeah, it was like kind of a that hands-on application of everything that you learned in your MBA, combined with a lot of the oil and gas related experience that you had. Talk a little bit about the differences between downstream and upstream, right? Like, I know maybe from the outside it's just oil and gas, and everything
Right.
sort of flows together. It makes sense, and there's a supply chain to all of this. But talk about some of the differences, right? Like, what did you do in downstream versus what you immediately took on in upstream, and what are some of the kind of quirks of each?
Yeah, I think in downstream, I was in refining, but there's also chemicals, which some of my colleagues at the time worked in. So I had 4 different jobs in a refinery. Exxon used to have a refinery out here in LA, and I did my first 2 years was an environmental advisor. So what's that? You're basically a translator between Exxon operations and Exxon corporate law, right? So um, applying all of the federal and state regulations of California and making sure the site complies with them. Anytime
Hmm.
there's issues, translating operational speak into legalese for the lawyers, and then also dealing with government inspectors that come around and want to check out stuff. So that was that. Then I did more traditional jobs. That first one was really out of left field. Never thought I'd do something like that. Then I did more traditional jobs like running an operational unit as an engineer,
Mm.
working with the economists, figuring out what kind of gasoline octane do we need for the Vegas market, for the LA market. Moved on to basic project management, small construction projects in and around a refinery. And then before I left, I was a risk manager. So, have a bunch of engineers and inspectors figuring out all the risks in a refinery of a pinhole leak, thinning metal, and then figuring out, okay, what's the cost of de-risking all of this, and then working with the maintenance planners to get the most risk reduction for the dollar spent, to make the refinery safer. So that was pretty interesting. It's like big um vessels, tanks, mammoth, just equipment everywhere.
Mm.
you could easily get lost in these places. And then you go to upstream, and being an Exxon, my picture of upstream was always those rigs in offshore, right?
Yeah,
Because those are cities by themselves. Those are like little floating refineries. But traditional upstream, what we see, in lower 48, you go out there, it's pretty simple, but it's like out in the middle of nowhere, right? So it's a bunch of small, tiny risks spread out over mass amounts of land versus a refinery or a rig is a massive, massive risk concentrated into a very tiny piece of land or ocean, right? So, because you go up in the lower 48 and you see like, okay, 6 soda can size tanks, the tank batteries and a
sure.
well and, some meters, and that's it, right? That's the whole thing. But you just have thousands of them dotted across the land. So I thought that was really interesting. And I think it's a good way for the large companies to spend a lot, but then each individual operational unit is a small risk, right? Like a fire in a refinery or an oil platform in the ocean is, way, way bigger than a fire in a tank out in the middle of nowhere on one tiny little battery. Okay, you can put that out in no time, right? So
Yeah.
your risk is much less, and chances of things, going wrong.
Yeah, I like that. So it put you in a situation where you're like, okay, cool. I've worked with these big vessels. I've dealt with uh, government risk, environmental risk, big company legalese, and then it's like a little bit like if I'm reading between the lines, a little bit more Wild Westish, right?
Oh yeah,
You've got various different types of tech. You've got very disparate assets. You have companies who own these assets in fields that are thousands of miles apart that operate differently. When you got to Seven Lakes, what were you working on right away? And then what did that sort of evolve into? Because I feel like, at least when you came on, it was a lot of like, data management, analytics, and then eventually it turned more into the uh, field services management, field data capture, like field based stuff. But what was
yeah,
kind of your evolution from a product standpoint? And then needing to learn expertise and seeing how different these uh, silos of each organization were.
yeah. Yeah, when I joined on, we were doing a lot of custom app development. I think you probably remember a lot of it, like, the
Sure.
financial authority matrix and well life cycle management and all these custom dashboards. So we were working with a lot of companies primarily in Oklahoma at the time, doing a lot of these projects. I was managing those, and then that kind of taught me about how to work with developers, translating requirements. Managing expectations, the budgeting and all that I already had from Exxon, but making these custom code changes and learning how developers work. Well, fast forward, I think Seven Lakes made the decision. Hey, a lot of the times we're making the same product for a different customer. Why don't we
Yep.
just consolidate the code base, make it all a standard product? And then so we consolidated, and that's kind of when I started getting into the product marketing and product management side. So now I knew how to work with developers. I knew how to translate requirements, but now I had to tackle the challenge of how is it that when company A wants one thing, company B wants the other thing, it's not just for company A. I'm able to talk to the developers in a way that we're making a feature that's usable by the next 10 companies, the next 20 companies. And then how do you
Yep.
increase that usability, right? Versus just having flags in the back end that says if Exxon this, if Chevron this, if Pioneer this, right? So I got pretty good at that, and then had some, good mentors along the way and learnings along the way, and through all the different folks that passed through Seven Lakes. So just started adding to the toolkit, and then that led to the proliferation of what eventually became FDG, and then which is all of your production data gathering. And then after that, we took on a new challenge where the field was like, hey, can you give us something to manage our work and our tasks? And I was like, well, don't you have big players like SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, whoever? But when we saw what they were offering, we realized why they were asking us to do that, and then we started building that out. And now that's also getting a lot of uptick in the marketplace. So kind of rare that you get two hit products, but that's pretty cool to be able to do that, and both of them being field first.
Yeah, FDG to me was always fun because it it was leveraging iOS technology, right? iPad-based field data capture, put it in the hands of lease operators, and I think you may have even been with me in some of these meetings, but hearing, 55, 65-year-old lease operators saying, "Man, I don't know how to use that thing, but my, 6-year-old nephew, grandson,
Right.
does." And I'm thinking, "Man, this is gonna change pretty fast," right?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
these guys aren't gonna have a choice eventually. They're gonna have to start inputting data there and then seeing the SCADA feeds tie into the field data capture solution. It was, to me, very logical, right? Innovative, sure, but mostly like this was the direction it was going to go because you had to get people away from writing things down by hand in the freezing cold in somewhere like
Right.
North Dakota or
Oh
Alaska or
yeah.
something like that. But then after I left in about 2017. You and I kept in touch, and you started being like, "Hey, we've got this like FSM thing." I'm like, "I don't know about that. I sort of know about the legacy Seven Lake stuff." Talk about FSM because you were telling me the last time we spoke about some pretty like kind of fun and cool use cases for this field services management solution that you sort of helped architect. So what does it do? And how do companies
Yeah.
benefit from this? And then where is it going to go once you sort of outline what the solution does?
Yeah, so FDG kind of took the administrative workload off of the operations, right? All the manual, multiple data entry. So now you have this free time. Well, what do you do with it? Well, everybody wants to upskill their workforce and have them do maintenance work, right? That's the next level of complexity so that you're not having to spend much on vendors. But the challenge was whether you were spending on vendors or your own folks, the transparency of what work's getting done, how, when, how to keep everybody on the same page wasn't there, and work was still flowing in from multiple different directions on multiple different systems.
Sure.
So, but if you own the last mile of what the field sees, which is mobile app, then you can literally get everything to them on a single pane of glass, so to speak. So that's essentially what FSM's turned into, is the ability, whether it's your environmental inspections, your maintenance, or metallurgical inspections, your fluid readings, your uh, maintenance workflows, compressor jobs, pump repair jobs, valve repair jobs, anything you can imagine, right? All of that, whether it's from your SAPs or manually input or coming from SCADA, all of that ends up on the field technician or lease operator's phone. And they're able to say, "Yep, I did this. I didn't do this. I need more information on this." And meanwhile, in the control room or the foreman, they
Hmm.
have like a boardroom vision of everything that's going on in the field. So now everybody's essentially on the same page, and even your vendors can get a login on the same thing, where they have a secure view where they don't see other vendors or other things in the company, only what's assigned to them. And I think where it's headed now, what I'm seeing now is we've got one company that has drones detecting leaks in their field. The
Hmm.
moment it detects a leak, the drone calls the FSM APIs and dispatches a task for a field technician to go out there with a wrench and fix the leak like immediately. Same thing with sensors. If a sensor in the field, a stationary sensor, detects a leak, that sensor can call the APIs for FSM, dispatch someone to go fix that. So I used to hear about the time between a problem is found and a wrench being picked up to go fix it could be up to 4 days. Now
Yeah.
it's instantaneous.
Right, right. And this all sort of goes back to the Uberization of the oil field, which I know is something that
Right.
you have at least tried to help usher in. Sounds like you
Mm.
have ushered in. But a question a little bit, and I've been in some boardrooms before, and certainly over the last couple years with the Inflation Reduction Act and companies looking to be, good stewards of emissions, right? It starts with monitoring and then it moves into alerting, right? But the challenge I've seen in the case of alerting is what is an alert and then what is like truly an alarm, right? So how does FSM detect like a threshold? So you mentioned like if there's a leak. Okay,
Mhm.
but what if that leak was something that happened because a test was being performed or something like that and that
Mm.
leak was actually an organic thing? that was supposed to happen, right? And
Right.
now somebody's called out and they show up and they're like, "What are you doing here? We were just performing a well test." Right?
Right,
So
right.
how does FSM become intelligent enough to know, I guess, the difference between an alert and an
Mhm.
alarm, right? Or do you
Right,
just
right.
dispatch the people anyway and say, "Figure it out"?
Yeah, so there's different modes of dispatch, right? There's usually some rationalization done up front where if it's critical, it's one of those drop everything and go after it, then
Yeah.
you do that. Then there's the ones that first go to the control room or a supervisor where,
Mhm.
they're aware of everything that's going on. So they can just radio out there. It's like, hey, we're getting this alarm, dude. Is this legitimate? Right? Before they
Yeah,
dispatch
yeah.
someone. And then there's those where, SCADA might be floating in and out of alarm, in and out of alarm. Well, heck, if you set that up, you could get 100 different dispatches over and over just from things floating in and out.
Right.
So there, it's smart enough to have we have a setting where you can say, hey, in case it's floating in and out of alarm, only do one task, and as long as that dispatch is active, you don't dispatch more.
Got it. And yeah, I mean, it's just sort of a
Mm.
curiosity thing, right? And something that
Yeah.
operators have asked because 'cause they're like, the problem will be, it's
Right.
like the boy who cried wolf, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
keep telling you that there's a wolf and the wolf never shows up. Well, then they're just
Right.
gonna ignore it. And then when the
Right.
wolf shows up, nobody goes, right?
Nobody
So,
goes.
fascinating, stuff that you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think drones in general, um, make a lot of sense for the oil field for concentrated areas, especially those that have really strong detection. We're gonna see that become, um, widely adopted, especially in certain basins in states like Colorado, California, where having that real time monitoring is super important. So, love that your app ties into that. Want to go back a little bit to the business side, and then we'll get away from business and talk personal and sports and all that
Mhm.
other fun stuff. So, um, for for you, right? So you were at Seven Lakes, I guess, if my math is right, for like 7 years, and then there start to become some rumors, hey, this company might get acquired. I even remember some people from Seven Lakes reaching out to me like, hey, wait a second. These people from W Energy are like coming out here into our office a lot. Not totally sure what's going on, but you worked at W Energy Software, Jerry. Like, what do you know? And I even said this to Mark Hill, who was the CRO, and I think probably one of the initiators of why Seven Lakes was acquired by W. He and I would even talk about this in 2020 when I was working there, that W had really embraced cloud and had embraced Amazon Web Services and truly wanted to be a disruptor in the accounting land production space, both for upstream as well as midstream, and sort of be that cloud-based ERP, and then the first one to kind of place their flag there. But what was missing was the production, field data
Mhm.
capture, all the way through to the allocations piece, just wasn't there, right? It wasn't where some of the other competitors were. And Mark and I were both like, man, the perfect fit for this company would be Seven Lakes, right? Same tech stack, offshore development team, subject matter expertise, and logical plug and play application, right? So I think Mark started putting those dots together and said, hey, we should probably get serious and take a look at these guys, right? So sure enough, the deal's finalized, the acquisition happens. And now you've been there by my count, whatever, 2.5 years since it happened. So talk to me a little bit about W. I mean, certainly the differences between Seven Lakes and W. Has it been seamless? Has it been challenging? I don't want to put you in a position where you could lose your job by saying anything too crazy, but I mean, I would guess, and I can speak to this having worked at both companies. People cared at both those organizations. The skill sets and subject matter expertise was different,
Mm.
for sure. One's sort of more field centric, one's more back office centric, and more of a slant toward midstream, where Seven Lakes was a slant toward upstream. Both cared about innovation, both cared about like being cloud and like being firm about that. But talk to me a little bit in your experience, since you've spent more time at both those companies than I have. Like, what was that transition like, and what are some of the differences and similarities between W and Seven Lakes?
Yeah, I think the similarities were plenty from, like back then it was, there was not a lot of companies that were natively on the cloud to start with in oil and gas tech.
Right.
So that was the big similarity. I think the want to do innovation, when I looked at some demos that they originally showed us, I'd had interface with accounting systems before, but SAP
Yeah,
like. But there were some really cool features that they had, whereas like accounting's a hard thing to be innovative on. But I saw some things I was
100%.
like, oh, these guys did some pretty cool stuff there. Um, they had this feature called a calc trace, which was really awesome.
I like that.
And yeah, so there's definitely the innovation, being on the cloud, um, a lot of that mentality of for better and for worse, not being able to say no to the customers, right?
Yeah,
Um, which is can be a good thing in the early growth years, and then it can quickly turn into something you don't want to continue doing because it's not as sustainable. So we had similar, I think, good and bad habits on both sides. I think the major difference for me that I've seen was that like you pointed out, they yeah, W was very accounting centric. And, Seven Lakes was pretty much, except for like maybe the AFE tool, it was almost entirely field centric.
yeah,
We went as much into the back office as production accounting at the most, right? Not beyond that. Um, so I think that was the main thing. So, I think from but other than that, philosophy wise, I don't think there was too much of a difference otherwise. So it was more like there was a natural, for lack of a better word, silo, just because it's like, hey, we're in the field, you're in the accounting.
right.
The integration piece was what's important, right? So we've done the preliminary integration, and then we're solidifying that even further going forward, where um, it's more, um, I guess, built out going forward versus bare minimum just to get everything integrated up front. But now you have that story of from field to finance, and while there's maybe companies that have the individual components, there's not a lot that can tell that story seamlessly through a native integration, right? It's most companies out there have bought up a lot of different software, but then they're still different pieces.
That's right.
Versus here, there was that intention that we're not just going to buy software modules and earn the buy the revenue. We want to add the value of the systems talking to each other.
Yeah, and it makes sense. Like what P2 bought Merrick, right? And they saw that as a natural value add, and that was what 2015 or something like that. And then um, Quorum bought some field data capture stuff as well. I forget what it was
Mhm.
called, but they bought that and continued to build it out. Pack Energy bought Scout, right? I mean, so all of these companies that are accounting focused are like, wait a second, there's a little bit of a gap here. And
Mhm.
I think that from a technology standpoint, the W7 Lakes marriage was seamless from the outside. It made a ton of sense. What I was always kind of curious about is like culture. So here you've got a Tulsa company, and then you have a California company with an office in India, right? So you've got
Mhm.
these Indian dudes, right, out in California or overseas, and then you've got these cowboys and cowgirls, right, in
Right.
Tulsa, Oklahoma. What's that been like? Kind of reconciling like the different personalities and cultures and making it all work together.
Yeah, you'd think that would be like something that would come up more just because of the differences in the culture, but I think, I haven't heard, anything on the lines of, hey, it's just really hard to understand or, anything like that.
Yeah,
It's really both sides are just trying to understand what is the business need. And then once that's clear, then it's pretty seamless. But yeah, I wish I had more funnier stories to tell on that side of it, but it's been pretty mundane on that side. It was just okay. Yeah, we just gotta work on weird hours now because of the time, difference. But outside of that,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think a little bit also, like, from the Seven Lakes perspective, like, you're working with Central Time Zone cowboys and cowgirls in oil and gas anyway, right?
right.
Like, that had been the history of the company, so no
Yeah,
real
that was the other thing
difference.
is, we've had a lot of our India staff interface directly with customers, so they
Right.
already had that expertise. And then the other side of it is that, I think traditional hiring of Seven Lakes in India was you're usually going after the creme de la creme.
Right.
So that also probably played into it.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
No, makes sense. Has the pace of innovation remained the same, or do you feel like it's a little bit more measured now?
I wouldn't say it's measured. It's measured in the sense that you're gonna be more targeted in what you go after. Just because I think like you said, when I first joined Seven Lakes, it was the Wild West, right? Like I came from
Totally.
Exxon, where you know like one decision would take 30 revisions of a PowerPoint, right? Whereas here, I could draw up something on a one slide PowerPoint at the back of a napkin, and 2 weeks later, I'd have a working prototype, right? And like I was like, okay, we don't even know if we want to do this, but somebody's already built it, right? Um,
Yeah.
so whereas now it's like where we have a more defined approach. For example, we're starting to look into like large language models and things now, and we've got
Yeah, you have to.
some working prototypes of that. But there's specified bets where you put in all of your AI ideas, and then you measure them against one another, and then it goes through a review with the executive team, and then you figure out, okay, which ones are the biggest, baddest bets that we're gonna go after.
I love that. And
Yeah,
I do have to say, like, reflecting back 10 years ago, like, I miss those days a little bit, man. Like, it
yeah,
really
it was
was kind of
fun.
it was fun, I'm sure the stress on Shiva was more immense because he was footing the bill for the whole thing, but,
Right.
like, just seeing these new people, new personalities come into the organization and get thrown right onto projects and just constantly impress me with their ability to pick up concepts quickly was fun. And it felt
Yeah.
like nothing was really off the table. Like if somebody had a problem that technology could solve, that organization would solve it. Like a true tech consulting firm, right? Like
Mhm.
most consultants in traditionally in oil and gas are in it for the project management, right? Or sort of like the long term business case relationship. I think Seven Lakes was just big and like, hey, you got this specific problem, like that land solution that we did for Continental, right?
Mhm.
Landloader or whatever it was called,
Yeah,
right? And
yeah.
it's like, oh, we can help with that, right? You
Right.
need this data to come in here and go into here. Cool, we'll just build that and test
Yeah, we
it,
were
make sure it
just
doesn't
solving
break. And
problems ad hoc, like, "What's the problem of the day? Let's figure it out." Yeah.
it was wild, but it was
Yeah.
really fun. I mean, I think my biggest education in oil and gas came like 2013 to 2015 when someone would bring up a challenge. I'm like, I've never heard this before. And then somebody on Seven Lakes would be like, okay, well, here's the solution, right? And then wireframe
Right.
it out, JSON it out, and then all of a
Yep.
sudden it's solved. And then, of course, it became a little more boring, at least for me, when it's like, damn it, this is like a real company now, right? We've got like
Yeah.
products and investors and silos.
Yep.
Like, I miss the Wild West shit. That stuff was
Yeah.
fun. Um, so, some questions for you. I think you've articulated a lot from a technology standpoint, business, cultural standpoint, industry standpoint. But I'm curious, kind of Shrivan, from your seat, like you're not a big guy, right? But one of the things that you told me on our last call is your son's like a little ass kicker, right? He's like a Brazilian jiu-jitsu champion. So how does that happen? How does it do? What are you like 5'4" or something like that? And now your son's out here
Yeah,
kicking
I'm
everybody's
five,
ass?
6 or so.
All right, all right, all right. Sorry.
Yeah. But yeah, I can probably pass for 5'4" just because the frame is overall small, I don't weigh that much either. Um, but yeah, he was not really liking a lot of the, other sports I was putting him into. He hated even, going to taekwondo because he's like, "I'm only punching the air, it's boring." So, my neighbor told me about this jujitsu place, so I dragged him over there, and, he liked the fact that 20 minutes of the 1-hour class, and it was 2 hours back to back, so 40 minutes over 2 hours was literally baby fight club, essentially. So and but when he finally got in there, he realized, hey, it's not just simple roughhousing like he'd do with his friends or cousins. These guys had talent, right? So there were like
Yeah.
he was 8 when he started. There were 6-year-old girls just whooping his rear left and right. And so he cried for a couple months, but I kept pushing him towards it because I think this dojo was like, they weren't about to baby him. They were just looking at me as like, hey, you're the man. It's your job to keep him in here, right? And I was like, oh, okay.
Wow.
So he ends up going to his first tournament. by like the third or fourth month, and he gets a bronze medal. And then, that was like the shark taste blood type of thing. Like he'd had a taste of victory. And then he just went on a rampage and
Oh,
just started
that was
training
it.
like 5, 6 days a week, 2 hours a day, started lifting. Now I was just counting them the other day. He has like 17 medals, like 5 gold, 6 silver, 6 bronze. Has
Well,
another
damn.
tournament tomorrow. But yeah, it's been pretty cool. He got a sixth grader tried to bully him at school when he was in third grade, and he took care of that on his own. So that was
Wow.
pretty impressive. I was like, that's
No mo
better than
no
any
more of
medal you'll
that.
win.
No
Yeah,
more of that. Good for him.
yeah,
And are you still in, Los Angeles? Like, where are you
yeah,
now?
yeah. Still in LA. Yeah,
Where you grew up as well, and I think I remember you saying so I call you Shrivan in a very
yeah.
nerdy way, but in high school, you were Shrivan.
Shrivan or Doctor Shrey, and Shrey ended up turning into my son's name. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, and I've talked about this before, but athletic competition where I grew up in New Hampshire, it's okay, right? Like, I was a good athlete, I was captain of sports teams. It's not what it is in Southern California. So to be
yeah,
competitive in any sport in Texas or Southern California, you gotta be a beast. So
right.
he's seeing it from the other perspective where I had to learn the hard way where I'm like, "Man, maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was being like big fish, small pond." He's in the ocean, you know what I mean? He's out there trying to survive. So, good
Yeah,
for him, right?
yeah. It's pretty fun watching him. But see where it
Well,
goes.
I love it. Congrats. So, one of the questions that I asked you on the prep questions that I send over to everybody, and out of
Hmm.
147 or so episodes, I think maybe 4 or 5 have actually responded with answers, but I love when they do because I think it leads to more articulate thoughts when I do ask you questions.
Hmm.
But one of the questions that I asked you is, what gets you out of bed in the morning every day? And I found your answer to be incredibly fascinating and in some ways inspirational. So I'll just ask you, and you can say to the listeners, like, what gets you out of bed every day?
Yeah, I think I don't remember the exact words I, I used on
You want me to read
that.
it? Because it's really good.
Sure, if you have it up. But
Said you said, "Just the opportunity to live another day with the wonderful hand that I've been dealt and to ensure I don't waste it away. I think about how fortunate we are to have what we have compared to the rest of the world, and today I'd even argue compared to even so many in our own country. What are the odds a kid is born into a situation where his or her life will be equal to or better than mine? And the answer is very low." And that to me is like, it's so simple, but it's also awesome that you
yeah.
have that level of perspective and reflection. Like, where does that attitude and mindset come from? Does it come to those trips that you take to India where you see like real poverty in some cases, or even in Los
Um,
Angeles in some places? But because I think that's really admirable, and I wish more people would embrace that mindset.
yeah, I mean, I've been going to India since I was young, so I can't say I always had that mindset. I saw poverty, but I was kind of immune to it. I think my perspective changed when I started touching into the spiritual side and, actually consciously living, and thinking differently, like, not getting caught up in the daily rat race of, I got to do this, I got to do that. Right. Just thinking about, okay, what is it? What is my goal? Right. If I just want to be peaceful, then why am I getting so agitated about this, that, and everything else? So
Sure.
at the end of the day, I always try to come back to, this type of a thought like, okay, even if I had a bad day, how bad is it really? Like, what if, like, how many people in the world would consider what I have right now a problem? Like, no, like, very few, like, like less
Yeah,
than
yeah.
0.1% or whatever, right? Like, so then what am I really worried about, right? And yeah, so that's kind of how I think about that. But I say that in the answer. I wrote that down. It felt good writing it, but I can't say not every moment of every day is like that. You have to come
Of
back
course.
to that, right? So it's a conscious effort.
Yeah, and I love it, and I think you explained that extremely well. And something that I would add on to it is I have to catch myself in those moments too, and I'm very quick to point out when I'm complaining about something, whether it be to my wife or to Max, who's a colleague of mine, and you
Yeah.
worked with Max for a little bit, great guy. Um, and I'll always sort of preface it with, "I know this is first world problems, but." At the same time, I don't wanna minimize the fact that it's still problems, you know what I mean?
Right.
And it's you start to live in whatever lens you have, so I think it's really important that you're able to take that extracted view of the world and realize, yeah, I mean, here I am in the basement of a home. I've got heat, I've got electricity, I got food, I got healthy kids upstairs, right? I have a job running a business. My wife has a job. Like, I've got cable TV that I can turn on and watch the Patriots dynasty thing
Yeah.
after this if I want to in the afternoon. Like, health is good. So there's a lot that we have to be thankful for, and it's important to remind ourselves of that every day. Another question I wanted to ask you is about you, right?
Mhm.
So you have some more perspective now. You're probably coming up on 40 years old ish in
Yep.
that
Yeah.
ballpark.
Yeah, 40.
What advice 40?
Yeah.
There you go. 40. What advice would you have for young Shrivan Kamdar? Say that the 18, 20, 22-year-old version who's just trying to make it either through college, high school, or break into the working world. What advice would you give to yourself or to kids that are at that age right now?
Yeah, I'd say, number 1, not that you necessarily always have regrets because like we just discussed, life turned out pretty good, but, you always look back and you'd be like, "Well, I was afraid to take on certain things or certain challenges." So, when you look back 20 years, it's like, "Man, it wasn't that big a deal if I would have done it." So, number 1 would be don't be afraid to take on new challenges. Number 2 would be, related to that similar is do what you want. Don't worry so much about the traditional career building mindset because what I've discovered in 20 years is the world changes faster than you can plan for.
Mm,
So, don't worry about it.
yeah.
And I think the other is I've always been a really logical guy. And I've recently discovered, in the last maybe 5 to 10 years that I'm able to use that logic with that, if I take the emotion out of the logic that I have and, go back to that spiritual grounding we talked about, I'm able to use that to constructively, influence people.
Mm.
So I'd say, use that logic earlier in life and don't shy away from constructive conflicts, right? Like they're constructive at the end of the day. Take the emotion out of them, and all you're doing is constructing. You're not destructing anything.
Yeah, I will say that's one thing that I always admired about you is being grounded and unemotional. That's not I've had to learn that the hard way about myself because I am just innately emotional. But working with you and seeing the way that you operate, like I even remember one time you and I went on a business trip together, and I think it was in Tulsa, and we were going in there, and the guy that we are meeting with was saying like, "Oh yeah, you guys are the ones from 8 Lakes or 10 Lakes or
Yeah.
whatever," and I think it upset me, right? It's
Yeah.
like, "What do you mean? I've worked really hard to put this company's name on the map," and you're just like, "Yeah, whatever. Not everyone's gonna do business with us. Not everyone's gonna get the name right." And I think that was a really good balance for me to have. But nonetheless, it did kinda stand out, I think, to both of us of like, but, that could be interpreted as kinda disrespectful. But, we can let it roll.
Yeah, no, I remember that. I think I wrote that in one of the stories where that happened like a couple days after we had raised $20 million Series A, right? And the guy was asking us, "How do I know you guys are still going to be in business?" And I didn't say it at the time, but I was like, "How do I know still going to be in business?"
Yeah.
And I don't think that company ever made it out of the 2015 pop.
Yeah, I mean, oil, per barrel prices got down to what, $26, and I mean, even look at natural gas now, which is just totally in the crapper. Like it's tough. They're so commodity price driven, and that's why they need to embrace innovation. But yeah, I mean, I those are questions that you're just going to get at a startup, right? And not everybody's as plugged in when you're not in the tech universe
Right.
of of what's happening like we were. But like a $20 million Series A back then was fairly substantial for energy tech. There just
Yeah.
wasn't a lot of that happening, and that was kind of a cool and fun and certainly learning experience for me in so many different levels that exposed me to a different side of the financial verse as well as the technology universe. All right, I'm going to put you on the spot because we got a few more minutes here. I'm going to do rapid
Sure.
fire questions. I didn't prep you for these, but I know you're going to
All right.
answer it well. First question: who's going to win the uh, NBA championship this year?
I can't do it. You're holding up the seas jersey. Man, I don't know, I feel like when my when my Lakers aren't in it, I'm just out of it, you know? And
I
I know
hear
the
you.
Celtics are doing good, so they could take it, but I'm not sure. It's a different, league altogether now than the one I'm used to watching.
Yeah, the playoffs are a different beast. Celtics are
Yeah,
52 and 14 as of this recording, which is crazy. It's one of the best teams they've ever had. The Clippers are nice, and I think the NBA wants the Warriors and the Lakers to make it and maybe go on runs, but the odds are, like, they're gonna play each other in,
yeah,
like, the knockout round right away, so one of them's not gonna make it, the other one will be lucky
right.
to even win a series, and Denver's, like, really good,
Yeah.
trying to build their own little dynasty, so it should be fun. I'm gonna go with the Celtics, though. Second
I'll go with
question.
Denver again, even though
Fine,
back to back is
fine.
hard.
I'll accept it. Second question. What is your favorite oil and gas company to do business with over the last 10 years? Number 1. Who stands out?
Hmm, that's a good one.
Because 'Cause you've been in a lot of boardrooms now.
Yeah, it's just every now and then, I think more than the company, definitely some companies have culture. Like I'd say, Pioneer's been really cool to work with. They're always coming up with new ideas, and they challenge. They've challenged me the most. But they've also helped build us quite a bit. And Exxon, but the big guys are always fun. But what I'll say is, a lot of times, whether it's a big company or a small company, it's the people. Like you could have one guy come into one job and one role, and he or she will have so many ideas. And I know there's one person at a company in, I think, Midland, but they're Denver based, and the guy's like a maintenance and automation foreman. He was not even one of the original users of Join at all, but he got a login somehow. And over the course of the next 1 year, he moved their entire maintenance department onto FSM with no help
Wow.
from us as a vendor, all by himself.
Just
And
figured it
then,
out.
yeah, just figured it out. And then they stopped using whatever their old software was. And then that's when I spoke to him. And that he pretty much was just telling me about stories about how he's had 300% increase in the visibility of his contract labor, right?
Nice.
So he thought of that all by himself, right? Now that's rare. That's really rare where somebody gets their hands on your product all on their own and they do crazy things with it. But then every now and then you'll have someone who will just keep shooting you ideas, and then, hey, if I use this feature combined with this one, couldn't I make this happen? And I was like, holy crap, you could. And then, they'll use it in a way I had never imagined, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
I love that. I love hearing you talk about that, and it makes me think I should talk to you more about my business too, because my whole thing is finding companies who are tech forward but underserved on the sales side. So there's some
Mhm.
really cool stuff going on out there, whether it be from like uh, sustainability modeling, AI, large language model stuff. I think we could
Yep.
probably nerd out on some other conversations. But final question for you too, again to put you on the spot: Who was your favorite colleague at Seven Lakes?
Oh, I think, probably, I don't know that this is a secret, but probably Hari.
Probably
Um,
Hari
yeah.
Dad. He was a beast.
Yeah. So he was the one who brought
So
me in, and I think me and him formed a really close, relationship over the years. So we split up the responsibilities a lot, when we got into the later years. So, and he was always the one who was like, more calm, and I wanted to move like cheetah speed. So, it
yeah,
was a good balance.
yeah, he's man, well, just a stud. Like a lot of good memories with him too,
Mhm.
and extremely intelligent. Worked 18 hours a day type of guy. Just the type of dude where, and actually Sachin at one point, I forget, it was either right after Seven Lakes or he's looking for a job, and this to me was emblematic of how I felt about a lot of people at Seven Lakes, and like I was Sachin asked me to be a reference for him, and I just remember the HR person asking me these questions. I'm like, I don't like. There's not enough words for me to say that like you should be so lucky to
Right.
bring this guy to bring this guy on. It's the same thing I'd say about her or about you. It's like, let's see, he's like really good in front of customers. He's like got a really good attitude. He works 20 hours a day. He's incredibly technology savvy, right?
Right.
He listens. He's got a good laugh. You'd want him to date your daughter. Like, do I need I say I'd want him leading a team or I'd want him on my team?
Right.
Like, I'd want him in the office or I'd trust him to work remotely.
Right.
I'd want him on my board. I would put him
Yeah.
in front of you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
there was a bunch of guys that we worked with, and I think
There
we
was
were
a
all
lot of
fortunate
those.
enough
Yeah.
to have those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jimmy, Sachin, Murli, Panda, Naresh, remember him?
Yeah. He was tougher for me a little bit. Like, he just intrinsically was, like, um, very confident, right? And he was right
Oh,
a
yeah,
lot
big
too.
time. He
So,
was the
I
most
think
intimidating of the interviews that I had because he was on my panel.
right, but, like, then once you get to know him a little bit more, he
Right.
softens up, but,
Yeah.
like, also a beast. But, man, we had a good crew, we had a good time. Where can people find you and the product suite that you're working with, like, all those things, LinkedIn and websites and all that? Give it to us.
Yeah, mainly LinkedIn or just even the company email, Shrivan.Kamdar at WEnergy, software.com. Obviously LinkedIn, I'm trying to post more. Now that I'm doing some more work with AI, I feel like I should. Um, and then outside of that, the spiritual stuff I do, there's some nonprofits I work with. So if that's
Okay.
okay, I can send you the links. There's some stuff on Amazon that benefits like 150 tribal women in India through a NGO that I'm working with. So, it's like charcoal
Awesome.
free incense sticks and stuff. So if anybody's interested in that, they can buy it off Amazon and everything benefits the people back there.
Yeah, send it to me too. We'll throw it
Okay.
on the either the LinkedIn link or even the post to this
Okay.
podcast with Digital Wildcatters. They're big in supporting causes as well, as am I. But
Yeah.
Shrivan, awesome. Anytime I get to spend with you is good time. I know we didn't get much at NAPE since NAPE is a complete and
Yeah.
total shit show, but made this time now. You're doing great stuff. My advice and hope and thought for you is just keep innovating, right? Wherever you end up, if you end up taking over W Energy Software, if you go back to a big company, God forbid, or start your own thing at some point, like don't forget that it's the innovation that kind of put you where you're at in your career. So
Yeah.
I've always admired you for that and appreciate what you bring to the table. So thanks for coming on. What the funk?
No, thank you. It's been fun. I'll always love and enjoy talking to you and reminiscing about the good old days.